President Trump's massive demolition of the East Wing is now complete. Satellite pictures show what the White House complex looked like just a month ago. And here's the scope of the destruction on Thursday, with the East Wing of the building entirely gone. It'll be replaced with part of President Trump's 90,000 square foot ballroom, the cost of which has now ballooned to $350 million.
The current building, it'll be near it, but not touching it, and pays total respect to the existing building, which I'm the biggest fan of. It's my favorite place. I love it. We determined that after really a tremendous amount of study with some of the best architects in the world, we determined that really knocking it down, trying to use a little section, the East Wing was not much. In order to do it properly, we had to take down.
There are rules, there are procedures. And once again, everyone's been talking about how the destruction of the East Wing is a perfect metaphor for this administration, and it absolutely is. He could not care less about what the East Wing means to the American people. He couldn't care less about the role of Congress.
To live in, wanted to be more. They wanted it to be more humble. They didn't want it to be huge. They didn't want it to look like a palace. That's why it's not gold encrusted until recently, kings. Right? That was very important to them. Two, he lied about not destroying it.
All right. So here's something that's going to make your head spin. Donald Trump, the sitting president of the United States, is currently shaking down the Department of Justice for $230 million. Yeah, you heard that right. $250 million. And the wildest part, he might actually get away with it. Now, I know what you're thinking. How is that even legal? How does a president just demand a massive payout from his own Justice Department? And more importantly, why isn't this the biggest story in America right now? Because let me tell you, this is absolutely insane. So here's what's happening. Trump is claiming that he deserves compensation for all those investigations into him. The Russia thing, the election stuff, all of it. He's basically saying, hey, you guys investigated me, that caused me damages, now pay up. And he's not asking the courts. He's not filing some normal lawsuit. No, he's pressuring the DOJ directly to just cut him a check. With taxpayer money, your money died. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest. You can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us, be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
Reasonable people might agree, okay, maybe the construction of a ballroom isn't the craziest idea. When people go to the state dinner, they have to go to the bathroom in porta potties. Maybe they want something nicer.
Not the gowns and the porta potties.
But her issue is the way it has been done.
Yeah.
That it could have been done in a way that it would preserved the East Wing. You could have attached it in some way, had it adjacent to another structure, and that it is representative of, getting back to what Jonathan led with, of the way that we are supposed to do things in a democracy to come to a better outcome. The reason why democracy operates in a consensus-driven way, and that we go through a process, the way legislation, regulations.
And get this, they might do it in secret, behind closed doors, where nobody can see it until it's already done. Representative Jamie Raskin came out a few days ago warning everyone that this payment could be processed through confidential DOJ mechanisms. Translation, they could hide it from the public until the year end, accounting rolls around. By the time we find out, the money's already gone. Trump's already got it, and there's nothing anyone can do about it. Can you believe this? The President of the United States is essentially billing the government for being investigated. It's like getting pulled over for speeding and then sending the police department an invoice for emotional distress, except, with $230 million. Now, ethics experts are losing their minds over this, and honestly, rightfully so. Because think about what's happening here. The Department of Justice works for the president. Trump is their boss. And now they're being asked to validate a settlement payment to their own boss using public funds. That's not just a conflict of interest. That's like the mother of all conflicts of interest. One official called it bizarre and nearly unbelievable. Another said it represents a fundamental conflict. And yeah, that's putting it mildly. Because here's the thing. If this goes through, what's stopping any future president from doing the same thing? What's stopping every politician who's ever been investigated from lining up at the DOJ with their hand out? And here's where it gets even more twisted. Trump's White House isn't just pushing for this payout. They're also pressuring the DOJ to halt federal prosecutions against Trump. So let's recap. The president wants the Justice Department to stop investigating him and pay him $250 million for the investigations they already did. This is wild. Now you'd think Republicans would be up in arms about this, right? The party of fiscal responsibility? The party that's always screaming about government waste? Well, mostly silence, crickets, a whole lot of looking the other way. One Republican senator, Tom Tillis, did speak up. He said the optics of Trump seeking a $250 million payout are terrible, especially at this moment. And yeah, Tom, thanks for that brave stance. The optics are terrible. That's one way to put it. How about the ethics are terrible? How about the legality is questionable? How about this is literally the president trying to raid the Treasury? But most GOP lawmakers aren't even going that far. They're just staying quiet because speaking out against Trump has never really worked out well for Republicans who want to keep their jobs. So they're stuck. Do they defend this obvious cash grab, or do they stay silent and hope nobody notices? Meanwhile, Democrats on the House Judiciary Committee are investigating. They're trying to trace the paper trail of communications between the White House and DOJ. They're looking at whether this represents broader attempts to politicize the Justice Department, to undermine the firewall that's supposed to exist between the White House and federal law enforcement. Because that firewall is kind of important. It's the thing that prevents presidents from turning the DOJ into their personal legal team. It's what keeps America from becoming a banana republic where the guy in charge can just weaponize federal law enforcement against his enemies or shield himself from accountability. And Trump is taking a sledgehammer to it. So yeah, this is where we are. The president is demanding a secret payout from the Justice Department while simultaneously trying to kill ongoing investigations into his conduct, and half the country's government is just letting it happen. This is the story nobody's really talking about, and it's absolutely bonkers. So let's dig into how we got here, what this really means, and why this might be the most corrupt thing happening in Washington right now. And trust me, that's saying something. Come on, people, wake up. This isn't normal. This isn't how any of this is supposed to work, and we need to talk about it before it's too late. Okay, so let's break down how absolutely unprecedented this whole situation is, because I don't think people fully grasp just how wild this is. Like, really sit with this for a minute. First, let's talk about this so-called compensation claim. Trump is arguing that the investigations into him were unfair, politically motivated, and caused him harm. Financial harm, reputational harm, emotional harm, whatever. And therefore, he deserves payment. Restitution. $230 million worth of restitution. Now, on its face, that might sound reasonable to some people. Like, okay, if someone wrongly investigates you and it causes damage, maybe there should be some recourse. But here's the problem. These weren't random investigations. These were federal law enforcement actions based on credible evidence. We're talking about interference in elections, obstruction of justice, classified documents, serious stuff. And Trump was never exonerated on most of it. Some cases are still ongoing. Some were dropped for procedural reasons or because he became president again. But dropped doesn't mean innocent. It doesn't mean the investigations were baseless. And it definitely doesn't mean the government owes him money. But that's not even the craziest part. The craziest part is how he's trying to get this money. Normal people, if they feel they've been wronged by the government, they sue, they go through the courts, they present evidence, a judge or jury decides, there's a process, like how things are supposed to work in a country with laws. Trump is skipping all of that. He's going straight to the DOJ and saying, hey, you guys figure out how much you owe me and then pay me. Oh, and by the way, I'm your boss. So, probably best to cooperate. This is insane. This is the definition of a shakedown. And the fact that it's being processed through confidential mechanisms makes it even worse, because transparency is kind of important in government spending, especially when we're talking about $250 million, especially when that money is going to the president himself. Like, imagine if any other government employee tried this. Imagine if some random federal worker said, hey, I didn't like that performance review, so I'm billing the agency for emotional damages. Pay me secretly so nobody finds out. They'd be fired, probably prosecuted. But when the president does it, apparently that's just fine. And let's talk about where this money is coming from. Taxpayers, you and me, regular Americans who are struggling with grocery bills, rent, student loans, medical debt. We're potentially funding a massive payout to a billionaire president who claims he was victimized by investigations into his own conduct. Can you believe this? Like, really sit with that for a second. Trump wants you to pay him for the inconvenience of being investigated, for doing what law enforcement is supposed to do, for holding powerful people accountable. He wants your hard-earned money because federal agents had the audacity to look into whether he broke the law. Now, defenders of this plan, and yes, there are some, they say this is just legal restitution. They say if the investigations were improper, compensation is justified. But here's the thing. There's been no legal determination that these investigations were improper. No court has ruled on that. No independent body has reviewed the evidence and said, yep, Trump was wronged here. It's just Trump saying he was wronged, and then Trump's DOJ agreeing with Trump, which is not how justice is supposed to work. That's not how any of this is supposed to work. And this brings us to the bigger picture here. The erosion of the firewall between the White House and the Department of Justice. Because this isn't just about money. It's about power. It's about a president trying to control federal law enforcement to serve his own interests. The DOJ is supposed to be independent. Not completely independent. Obviously, the Attorney General is appointed by the president, but there's supposed to be separation, distance, a recognition that the Justice Department serves the law and the Constitution, not the personal interests of whoever's sitting in the Oval Office. Trump has never respected that boundary. Not in his first term, not now. He's always viewed the DOJ as his lawyers, his enforcers, his tool for going after enemies and protecting allies. And this $230 million demand is just the latest example of that mindset. The most brazen example maybe, but not surprising if you've been paying attention. Because think about what this does to DOJ officials. They're being put in an impossible position. Their boss, the president, is demanding they approve a massive payment to him. If they say no, they could be fired, replaced with someone who will say yes. If they say yes, they're compromising their integrity and violating their oaths. Ethics experts have been screaming about this fundamental conflict. They're pointing out that you can't have the DOJ validating payments to the president. It's a textbook conflict of interest, but the Trump White House doesn't seem to care. They're pushing forward anyway, full speed ahead. And here's where the politics get really messy, because Republicans are caught in this terrible bind. On one hand, this is obviously problematic, obviously corrupt looking. The optics, as Senator Tillis so bravely noted, are terrible. Even people who love Trump have to admit this looks bad. But on the other hand, it's Trump. And criticizing Trump has become basically impossible for most Republican politicians. The base loves him. The party is shaped around him. Going against him on anything, even something this blatant, could end your career, could get you primaried, could make you a pariah. So most GOP lawmakers are just not talking about it. They're hoping it goes away. Hoping the news cycle moves on. Hoping they never have to take a position, because taking a position means picking a side, and either side looks bad for them politically. Meanwhile, Democrats are investigating, but let's be real, their investigations don't carry much weight. When they don't control the presidency or the DOJ, they can dig into the paper trail all they want. They can hold hearings. They can issue reports. They can make speeches on the House floor. But if the DOJ decides to cut that check, there's not much Democrats can do to stop it. And that's terrifying, because it means we're relying entirely on internal DOJ resistance to prevent this. We're hoping that enough career officials, enough lawyers and investigators who actually care about integrity will push back, will refuse to participate in what looks an awful lot like legalized corruption. But those officials serve at the pleasure of the president. They can be fired, replaced, sidelined, transferred to some dead-end position in Alaska, and Trump has shown he's more than willing to purge anyone who doesn't fall in line. He's done it before, he'll do it again. So the question becomes, how far will this go? Will the DOJ actually approve this payment? Will it happen in secret like Raskin warned? Or will there be enough resistance, enough public pressure, enough scandal to kill it before the check gets cut? Right now, we don't know. And that uncertainty is part of what makes this so disturbing. We're in uncharted territory here. There's no precedent for a president billing the Justice Department for being investigated. There's no established process for how something like this should work. No guidelines, no rules, which means Trump's team can kind of make it up as they go along. And that's exactly what they're doing. They're testing boundaries, seeing what they can get away with, pushing the limits of presidential power in ways that would have been unthinkable a decade ago. Hell, 5 years ago. This is part of a broader pattern, obviously. Trump has always pushed boundaries, always tested limits. In his first term, we saw it with everything from pardons to personnel decisions to foreign policy. Now, in his second term, he's going even further, because he knows there are fewer consequences, fewer checks, fewer people willing to stand in his way. He's learned what he can get away with. The $230 million claim is just one piece of that. But it's a revealing piece, because it shows just how transactional Trump's view of government is, just how willing he is to use federal institutions for personal benefit, just how little he cares about norms, ethics, or the appearance of impropriety. And the fact that this might actually work, the fact that he might actually get this money, that should terrify everyone, regardless of political affiliation. Because if this becomes acceptable, if presidents can start demanding payments from the DOJ for investigations they didn't like, we've crossed a line that we might never be able to walk back from. Yeah, this is bad, really bad, and we're just getting started. All right, so let's bring this all together and talk about what this really means, not just for Trump, not just for this administration, but for American democracy going forward. Because this isn't just a weird scandal that'll blow over. This is a fundamental test of whether our institutions can hold up against someone determined to break them. Point 1. This is about normalizing corruption. Now, I know people throw that word around a lot these days. Everything's corruption. Everything's a scandal. Everything's the end of democracy. But this actually is corruption in a very literal sense. The president is using his position to extract money from a government agency he controls. That's textbook corruption. That's the actual definition. And the scary part isn't just that it's happening. The scary part is how it's being framed as normal, as reasonable, as just legal restitution. Trump's defenders are already out there saying, hey, if the investigations were unfair, why shouldn't he be compensated? They're making it sound like this is just standard procedure, just another day in Washington. But it's not. This has never happened before. And if we accept it now, if we let this become just another controversial thing that fades from the news cycle, we're setting a precedent that every future president will use. Democrat or Republican, doesn't matter. Once you establish that presidents can build the DOJ, everyone's going to do it. And then it's not just about investigations. It becomes about any government action a president doesn't like, any decision that affects them personally, any policy they disagree with. Suddenly the Treasury becomes a personal bank account for whoever's in power. And that's not democracy anymore. That's kleptocracy. That's the kind of thing we see in authoritarian countries and shake our heads at. Point 2. This reveals the complete collapse of checks and balances. The whole American system is supposed to be built on separation of powers, right? Congress checks the president. Courts check the president. Federal agencies maintain some independence. But all of that requires people to actually enforce those boundaries. It requires people with power to say no. And right now, nobody's enforcing them. Congress is split and mostly paralyzed. Republicans won't challenge Trump. Democrats can't. Courts have been slow and often deferential. And federal agencies are run by Trump appointees who serve at his pleasure and know what happens to people who cross him. So when Trump decides he wants $230 million from the DOJ, there's no effective mechanism to stop him. Sure, people can complain. Ethics experts can write op-eds. Lawmakers can investigate. Former DOJ officials can sound alarms. But none of that actually prevents the action from happening. None of that has teeth. This is what democratic backsliding looks like. Not a dramatic coup or a sudden collapse, just a gradual erosion of norms and institutions until the rules don't really mean anything anymore. Until the person in power can pretty much do whatever they want as long as they have enough political support, as long as their party is too scared to stop them. And Trump has that support, at least among Republicans, at least among enough people to make challenging him politically dangerous. So he keeps pushing, keeps testing, keeps breaking rules that everyone thought were unbreakable. And every time he gets away with it, the next violation becomes easier. Point 3. The politicization of the DOJ is accelerating. Now, the Justice Department has never been perfectly independent. There's always been some political influence. That's kind of inevitable when the Attorney General is a political appointee, when the president chooses who runs the department. But there used to be limits. There used to be a recognition that federal law enforcement needs to operate above politics to have legitimacy. Trump doesn't care about that. He never has. He sees the DOJ as his tool, his weapon. And this $230 million claim is both a symptom and a cause of that politicization. It's a symptom because it shows how far Trump's willing to go in treating the DOJ as his personal legal team. And it's a cause because approving this payment would further compromise the department's integrity and independence. Think about it from the perspective of career DOJ officials. If they approve this payment, they're signaling that they'll go along with pretty much anything Trump wants, that there's no line they won't cross, that institutional integrity matters less than keeping the boss happy, that their oaths mean nothing, and that destroys morale. It drives out good people, the honest ones, the ones who actually believe in justice. It attracts the kind of people who are more interested in politics than law, more interested in power than truth. Over time, you end up with a Justice Department that's been completely captured by partisan interests. And once that happens, it's incredibly hard to fix because rebuilding institutional credibility takes years, decades even. You need consistent leadership committed to independence. You need accountability for past abuses. You need structural reforms to prevent future politicization. None of that is easy, and none of it can happen while Trump's actively trying to bend the DOJ to his will. Point 4. This is testing whether outrage still matters. Here's the thing about scandals in the Trump era. There are so many of them that they kind of blur together. Every week there's a new controversy, a new norm being broken, a new line being crossed. And after a while, people just get numb to it, exhausted by it. That's dangerous, because numbness leads to acceptance. If people aren't shocked by a president demanding $230 million from the DOJ, what will shock them? If this just becomes another story that gets a few days of coverage and then disappears, what does that say about our ability to hold power accountable? The Trump team knows this. They know that if they do enough outrageous things, eventually people stop being outraged. It's a strategy. Flood the zone. Make everything a crisis, so nothing's a crisis. Keep people overwhelmed and exhausted until they just tune out, until they can't keep track of all the violations anymore. But we can't afford to tune out. Not on something this blatant, not on something this corrupt, because this isn't about policy differences or political disagreements. This isn't about whether you like Trump's tax plan or his foreign policy. This is about whether a president can use his office for personal enrichment, whether he can shake down his own Justice Department. And if the answer to that question is yes, then we've lost something fundamental about what America is supposed to be. Point 5. The public is largely unaware, and that's the biggest problem. Most Americans have no idea this is happening. It's not leading the news. It's not dominating the conversation. There are other stories, other crises, other things to be outraged about. Celebrity gossip, sports, whatever Trump tweeted today. The news cycle moves fast, and complex corruption stories don't get the attention they deserve. But this matters. This is one of those moments where you can see the guardrails failing in real time, where you can watch democratic norms being destroyed and wonder why nobody's doing anything to stop it, why the media isn't screaming about this every single day, why voters aren't demanding answers. So here's where we are. Trump is demanding $250 million from the Justice Department. The payment could be processed in secret. Most Republicans are staying silent. Democrats are investigating but lack the power to stop it. Ethics experts are sounding alarms that nobody in power seems to be hearing. And the American public is mostly scrolling past this story to see what's trending on social media. Maybe the DOJ will push back. Maybe enough internal resistance will build that the payment never happens. Maybe public pressure will force Trump to back down. Maybe some judge will step in. Maybe Congress will find its spine. But maybe not. Maybe he gets his money. Maybe this becomes just another thing we accept because we're too tired to fight it, too overwhelmed to care. And if that happens, we should be very worried about what comes next. Because if Trump can get away with this, if he can openly shake down the Justice Department with no real consequences, then there's almost nothing he can't get away with. The next demand will be bigger, the next violation will be worse, and we'll keep sliding further and further from anything resembling accountable government. The rule of law, that's supposed to mean everyone's accountable, even the president, especially the president. But when the president can demand payments from law enforcement for investigating him, when he can pressure the DOJ to drop cases against him, when he can operate with almost no checks on his power, then the rule of law is just words on paper, just a nice idea we tell ourselves about how government is supposed to work. This is the test. This is the moment. And right now, we're failing it. The question is whether anyone with actual power will step up and do something about it. Whether there are any Republicans left who care more about the Constitution than their political careers. Whether DOJ officials will risk their jobs to do the right thing. Whether the media will treat this with the urgency it deserves. Or whether we just let this slide like we've let so many other things slide until one day we wake up and realize we don't really live in a democracy anymore. Until we look around and wonder how we got here. How we let it get this bad. Stay tuned, because this story's not over. It's probably just beginning. And honestly, it's probably about to get a whole lot worse before it gets better, if it gets better at all.